Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to share with you some thoughts and comments that I have with regard to a very special and extraordinary work from the Japanese filmmaker and cinema master whose name is Takeshi Kitano. This time, I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on a film from 2002, and it is this film. In Japanese, it is called DOLLS. In English, it is called DOLLS. So the Japanese title and the English title are exact in terms of the meaning, DOLLS. In essence, this film can be described as being made up of various or different stories that could be said to have each of them a linkage with and among each other, each dealing in their own way with stories about either lost love or relationships, intimate relationships that have experienced or incurred some kind of tragic consequence. And oftentimes the tragic consequence is due to human foible or error or weakness that have consequences going forward that lead to quite emotionally devastating circumstances, thus setting the stage for tragedy or lost love. And this idea of lost love is expressed very specifically in the context of each of the narratives that we see portrayed. So in essence, it is a kind of ensemble, or we have different short stories making up the entire whole. There are intersections that we see going on from place to place. And these intersections, I would suggest, are made and applied in a very poetic and lyrical manner, and to liberate or free up the cinematic space that Kitano does so well. But I think on a thematic core level, we see that there are many parallels and many compare and contrast moments that we can make between and among the various stories. So this is, I think, one of the things that is very remarkable about this work, about how they seem to be quite disparate, but in fact there is a core emotional connection or linkage that is occurring between and among these stories. And speaking of which, we have one story which features Miho Kanno and Hidetoshi Nishijima in what is oftentimes suggested. It seems to me the story that we are experiencing the most in terms of pure running time statistics. But the poster and the DVD cover art is suggestive of this particular story, which is this couple that are walking through various scenes of Japan, and they are joined by this rope, this long, thick, red rope that is tied, one end tied around one person, the other end tied around the other person, and they are walking, and there's a considerable amount of rope between them, but they are walking and they are dragging the rope along. And as they are walking through various landscapes, people are staring at them. They are getting these odd and strange looks from strangers. And then we realize through the course of the film what their story is, and about how they were lovers and they were very happy, but then certain circumstances, quote-unquote real-world circumstances, came in, external pressures came in, which meant that the young man had to make a choice that meant abandoning his lover and his soulmate in many ways, which caused terrible and emotionally devastating consequences to the young woman and then to the young man, thus leading to a very poetic and metaphorical disposition with respect to these characters and how they are wandering seemingly aimlessly throughout the various landscapes that are presented to us as viewers. And these landscapes are presented in a very beautiful, colorful, and almost Japanese postcard-like way, in the way that, say, the cherry blossoms are depicted, or the sea, the coastline is depicted, and the mountains landscape and the snow landscapes are depicted, and things of that nature. So these are very beautifully picturesque Japanese landscapes, and these two figures in this seemingly metaphorical stance are walking through, and we realize the weight of their situation as they're walking through from place to place to place, seemingly to some kind of end or journey, whatever that may be. And then the second story is about a gangster or yakuza person who seems to be a high-ranking boss of some kind, and we see him struggle with certain choices that he has made in his past with regard to his older Japanese gangster yakuza connections. There may have been betrayal upon betrayal upon betrayal in his past life. We see that played out specifically in his narrative, and we also see the choices that he made and the consequences that occurred to him as far as possibilities of love that were there when he was a young man, but he abandoned for other ventures. And he comes back and he realizes that his choice of abandonment has caught up with him in a very heart-breaking sort of way. And so we see him, in essence, trying to come to grips with the choice that he makes, quite directly so. And there is a very beautiful way that a park and a park bench, and sitting with someone at a park bench, is the wholly defined metaphor for this kind of contemplation of loss and choice leading to abandonment, and dealing with the consequences as one gets older and reaches a point of very palpable and very immediate mortality. So that is the second story. And then the third story is a modern take on the J-pop idol phenomenon, and we have the idea of stardom and popularity and fans and the singer idols that they idolize. And one young man in particular very much is infatuated with this young J-pop singer who has a very cute type of personality that is portrayed in media and on TV and with her songs and the like. But there is also this opportunity for her, the singer, the idol, to meet her fans, her various fans, and thus creates this innate sense of friction and jealousies that occur among the fan base. And these are, and one fan in particular is focused upon. And this relationship is further developed when we realize that something quite serious and significant happens to the singer J-pop idol, and what the consequences are of that, and how the relationship between the singer and the fan, how this develops, if at all, to the point of emotional and physical extremes. And so this is, I think, the third story. So with this traversing of story to story to story, I think we realize that there is, as I say, linkages of lost love, of choice, of consequence, of emotionally devastating consequences, sometimes even physically demanding and quite significant consequences, etc. And these are also placed in very well-structured metaphor that I think can each be a sort of reflection, if you will, of not just storytelling technique, but also a reflection of a kind of Japanese society perspective and or a literature perspective. So what do I mean by this? So first of all, we have let's take the J-pop singer story. I think this is a very interesting take. Among other things, it's an interesting take on stardom in modern day Japan. The pop singer phenomenon and the relationship between the star and the fan. And I don't mean in terms of a stalker type of thing. I mean in a very pure, simple, tender way. Someone who is really infatuated with someone, and what happens, how one is affected when the star is affected by certain news events, current events, and other types of things. And so that, I think, is very much a reflection on stardom and on a modern take on media and modern media and Japanese media in particular. And if we remember that Kitano himself, Takeshi Kitano, beat Takeshi, who doesn't appear in the film per se, but he also is an entertainer and a very popular one. And so there could be instances where he is giving us an inside look at the world of entertainment, which is part of the landscape of modern day Japanese society, undeniably. So that's one aspect. And then the middle story, which is the gangster story and sitting at the park bench, etc. There is something quite interesting about the use of parks and benches in the cityscape, because parks are, while they are not extinct, they are a little bit, they are limited in number because of the nature of the landscape and the limited availability of space, etc., public space. And so parks are used in a very interesting way as a moment of contemplation, a break from the hustle and bustle of city life. And sitting at a park bench is, I think, a very quaint and a beautiful metaphor for that kind of contemplation. And it creates a great contrast between the mode of reflection and the busy nature of an exciting life in the city. And I think that is where we find ourselves with this particular character, or these characters in this gangster element story of the plots. And so I like that use, and it seems to me also to be a very, we have here people taking breaks from their salaryman jobs or their what we call office worker jobs. And so we see people in their office uniforms sitting for lunch, meeting with colleagues, meeting with friends for lunch in their suits or something of that nature. So there is a sense of the modern day work habits of Japan, and we have the main characters that seem to be part of, or perhaps even wholly separate from, this otherwise real world. So we have an otherworldly sense that feeds in further to the poetic metaphor of their particular story, and how that they seem to be even more wholly separate from what is going on with the rest of society. And I think that is a very interesting take with respect to that story. And then the first and perhaps quote-unquote main story, which is this couple and the choices that they have to make, or the young man has to make, in order to, in essence, try to satisfy the needs and wishes of his parents, and because of certain financial situations of his family, and also the need or desire or wish to succeed and advance one's career in the company. And in order to do that, one needs to be on very friendly terms with the boss. And what does that mean? Maybe marrying the boss's daughter or something of that nature. And so these kinds of choices, I think, are very reflective of financial situations in modern day Japan, the family unit needing to rely on the the college-educated son's career in order for some kind of financial stability, to the point where they ask the son to make choices that are antithetical to his own emotional needs and wants and desires and wishes for his own life. And so it really begs the question, is one really in control of one's life if one wants to be fully integrated into Japanese society as through the perspective of Kitano's story and camera work? And so I think this is very much in keeping with what we see in past Kitano films, which is the rigidity of certain conventions of Japanese society and the need on an emotional level to break free from these rigid rules. And I think we see the consequences play themselves out in each of these stories about how or in particular this main story about how the inability to break free from rigid conventions, I think, leads to emotional disaster. And based on those consequences, how one can cope and how one can put the pieces back together again, if at all. So I think there is something really wholly consistent going on with this film, integrated a whole, and the rest of Kitano's film body of films in his filmography. So it's an excellent and key work in that respect. I think also we have the great way that Kitano is applying his cinema techniques, and he seems to be relying on different modes of storytelling. Of course, we have the cinematic, the purely cinematic Kitano way, which is beautiful and abrupt and pensive and then sudden. And so there is a sense of surprise and upshifting of balance, but also a calm, serene feel that is made even further beautifully realized by the cinematography, Yanagishima's cinematography, and the looks and the colors added on by the lovely costumes and fashions, Yoji Yamamoto, and then the application of a beautiful, serene sense of music and style, Joe Hisaishi, and the overall cinematic effect. Added on to that, of course, is the Kitano signature style of editing and camera work and stillness, thus creating this beautiful tableau palette, if you will, of colors that are beautiful and rich and vibrant, while at the same time suggesting a story that is dark and tragic, and oftentimes touching upon notions of death and love. So we have these really vivid contrasts occurring at the cinematic level, which is absolutely engaging and brilliant. And then, of course, we have the Takeshi filmmaking style expressing itself by focusing in on the act of storytelling itself, and literature and traditional forms of storytelling in Japan, in particular bunraku theater, and references to Chikamatsu Monzaemon, for example. And so this is, I think, made front and center not just by certain conceits that are applied, especially at the start of the film, but also the way that those conceits are integrated into the film via the costumes, via the fashion, etc., and also via the quote-unquote metaphors that are applied in this film with the rope and the way that characters walk through the frame. It seems to be a way of capturing characters that are not traversing a realist type of plane of cinema, but rather traversing a plane of cinema that could be said to be, and I mean this very positively, maybe two-dimensional in terms of the dimensions used. We're not talking about a moving camera that goes from handheld place to place to place, but it's purposeful, and there is a focus, and we have characters that tend to go from one side to the other or vice versa. And so they traverse this two-dimensional plane, which I think is very much in keeping with the act of the focus on the act of storytelling and the notion of the stage, and we as audience members from the vantage point of the gallery are looking on and onward towards the stage, and we see characters walking back and forth like this. And I think that use is a very subliminal application of the technique of theater applied to the various storylines, and I think it's applied quite brilliantly, not just in vivid conceits that we see applied very beginning that make direct links to Japanese traditional theater, but also in the way that the characters traverse and they are positioned within the camera frame of Kitano. So well done in terms of those direct and subliminal applications of the theater and the mode of storytelling in and of itself. And I think also we can make further distinctions or parallels in the way that Kitano is trying to tell stories. And if we remark or if we notice, we see a lot of characters that are focused on. The duo or the pair is very important in the world of Kitano's films. And I've made reference to the idea of links to Beat Takeshi's past and his comedian roots, in particular the duo, pair, comedian routine known in Japanese as manzai, and we see a lot of pairs in this film. We see the main characters in their various stories, of course, but we also see other pairs occur in the periphery, in the outer area, but they emerge in various points of the film. And so when you watch this film, notice how pairs are employed and how there is a back and forth between the pairs. And I think there is, in essence, a kind of manzai heritage being brought forth in this very dramatic setting of this film. Also, we see how the pairs interact and their communications. And if we recall in past films, for instance, a film like A Scene at the Sea or Hanabi, we see characters or pairs or couples in those films, and there is a sense of silent communication. That is, the characters seem to know exactly what is going on between them, but there is very little dialogue, if any, that travels between them in terms of outward spoken words. And so I think something very similar is happening with some of the pairs here, where what they say or what they don't say to each other on the one hand, and what they understand and what they intuit on a very emotional level between them. I think there is a dual type of communication going on. And it's made actually quite, there's a very striking way that Kitano is employing the sense of non-dialogue between some of the characters. Before, there was a sense in, say, Scene at the Sea or Hanabi, there was a sense that the characters understood each other, but they didn't need words in order to understand each other. There was a really close connection. Here in Dolls, I think there is a twist on that type of approach. The act of non-dialogue is actually very much suggestive also of heartbreak and of sorrow and of real emotional devastation because of actually great disappointment that has occurred. And so that silence means something very sad. And so there is that hint of sadness, or not just a hint, it's quite an application, if you will, of the notion or the atmosphere of sadness that is associated with silence. So I think that is an interesting development or evolution or application of the Kitano style. Silence equaling what? Silence here equaling understanding, or does it equal sadness or sorrow, or does it equal everything in the above? And that's kind of interpretation which I think is really wonderful, and a further development of Kitano's style, and another way of looking at or listening to or absorbing the silence, what it means, right? And I think that is a great way to sort of broadly step back and see how this film fits, because there are things that stand in for other things. I mean, this is, again, a film that is not necessarily a film about real life. It's not a film that is using real life techniques trying to capture a real life feel. This is a theatrical type of film. This is a film where we have things standing in for other things. Metaphors are applied. Situations, dramatic ones, are boiled down to their essence. And so we have, therefore, characters that have a certain dramatic clash. Instead of certain plot devices are set up in order for them to be able to meet in a quote-unquote realistic way, the plot is in essence boiled down to its very core. So we have these two characters that need to meet on a dramatic level, they just meet, and we see what happens and what transpires and the consequences that arise therefrom. And so I think that's the concern of Kitano's cinema, in particular as distilled in this film Dolls. Metaphor is key, but metaphor becomes the direct drama. And because it becomes a direct drama, almost the link between metaphor and drama becomes really blurred because I think of many of the techniques that I was trying to refer to earlier in this video, and also the strength of the performances, and also the real emotional depths that these characters are going through, which I think are feelings or emotions or situations in life that I think maybe we all as viewers can relate to in one form or another. The idea of disappointment, love, lost love, choices that lead to disappointing consequences, and touches with mortality and death. And so these, I think, become aspects of the accessible nature of this film. And so therefore, even though it relies on really beautifully applied metaphor, it still becomes very easily accessible, which I think is a great paradoxical, brilliant aspect of this and other films by Takeshi Kitano. This is the film Dolls. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.